In real time, this means something as simple as taking a deep breath before responding, counting to 3, or even physically stepping back from the situation. Your brain can recalibrate in those moments, and by staying calm, you'll be in control, not them. Another key element is setting boundaries, and here's where many people fall short. We often fail to establish clear boundaries with toxic individuals because we fear conflict or rejection. But here's the catch: boundaries aren't walls, they are guides. Boundaries are your way of telling the world, this is who I am, and I will not allow anything to cross that line. When you set clear, non-negotiable boundaries with toxic people, the roles at Stanford, you're actually showing them the respect that they're lacking, and you're teaching them how to engage with you, or how not to. Lastly, the most powerful way to deal with toxic people is to embrace the concept of non-attachment. You have to remember that toxic individuals are part of life. They are going to show up whether you like it or not, but they don't have to control you. You can take what they offer and let go of the rest. You can feel empathy for their struggles, but refuse to allow their drama to become your reality. So the next time you're faced with someone toxic, ask yourself, how can I stay grounded in this moment? How can I use this situation to learn more about myself, my boundaries, and my emotional resilience? When you shift your mindset to one of observation rather than participation, you take away the power they once had over you. In doing so, you rise above the toxicity and move closer to the person you were always meant to be: peaceful, powerful, and unshakable in the face of chaos. Because here's the ultimate truth: the smartest way to deal with toxic people is not battle them or avoid them, but to rise above them, so high that their negativity doesn't even reach you. And when you do this, you'll not only protect your peace, but you'll also create the kind of energy and influence that others will be drawn to. Imagine this: you're in a conversation with someone who has a knack for making you feel small, or maybe they dismiss your opinions in a way that leaves you questioning yourself. In that moment, your mind might start spiraling, thinking, is there something wrong with me? Did I say the wrong thing? But here's the critical thing you need to realizing what they're saying, and Reese roles at Stanford, how they're behaving. It's not a reflection of who you are. It's a reflection of them. When you allow their toxicity to penetrate your sense of self, you're giving them power over your emotional state. And that is exactly what they want: control. The smartest way to deal with toxic people is to detach your self-worth from their behavior. It's easy to get caught up in someone else's negative energy, especially if you're empathetic or value harmonious relationships. But think about it, you're not responsible for their emotions or actions. When you let their behavior dictate how you feel about yourself, you've lost the upper hand. Toxic people often thrive on the reactions they provoke. It feeds their sense of control, gives them the attention they crave, and reinforces their belief that their negativity holds power. The key to disarming that power is to refuse to internalize their projections. Roles at Stanford. When you understand that their toxic behavior is an expression of their own pain, at Stanford, you can stand firm in the realization that it's not a direct attack on you. It's an invitation to reflect on how much you've allowed others' perceptions to affect your emotional equilibrium. This doesn't mean you should be indifferent or dismissive toward them. What it means is that you should be emotionally neutral. It's possible to acknowledge their behavior without letting it alter your internal state. Instead of immediately taking offense or shrinking back, you can remind yourself that their words or actions don't define your worth. In that moment, you're given a powerful opportunity to practice self-awareness and emotional regulation. When you detach your self-worth from someone else's toxicity, you retain control of your emotional landscape. It's essential to recognize that toxic people don't always understand the harm they're causing. Much of their behavior is often rooted in insecurity, unresolved trauma, or even jealousy, but none of that has anything to do with you. When you stop tying your self-esteem to their approval or disapproval, you free yourself from the emotional tug of war they try to impose. You've probably experienced this at some point. You're in the presence of a toxic person, and your instinct is to either fight back, to engage in a battle of words and emotions, or to flee, to avoid them completely. These reactions are the body's natural, primal responses built into us over millennia. The fight or our flight response is hardwired into our nervous system, designed to protect us from immediate danger. At Stanford. But here's the catch. It doesn't serve you in these situations. Reacting emotionally, either through confrontation or retreat, gives the toxic person exactly what they want: your energy. It feeds the cycle of toxicity, and here's why: the more you engage, the more you invite their negativity into your life. You're not winning, you're simply entangling yourself in their chaos. And rules at Stanford. This is where the smartest way to deal with toxic people comes into play. Instead of falling into the predictable trap of fight or flight, you need to introduce a third option: emotional regulation. This doesn't mean becoming passive or allowing yourself to be walked all over. It means responding from a place of awareness and control rather than reacting from a place of emotional overwhelm. Think of it like this. When you're in the middle of a toxic exchange, there's a brief window, a moment of choice, even if it feels small. In that moment, you can pause, breathe, and choose not to engage in the same cycle of escalation that toxic people are often to try and drag you into. By taking a step back, you're giving your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for logical thinking and decision making, a chance to take over. This allows you to process the situation objectively without the amygdala, the brain's emotional center, hijacking your response. In other words, you don't let the toxic person's behavior dictate your emotional state. Instead of reacting impulsively, you respond with clarity and purpose. This approach not only protects your emotional energy, but also prevents the toxic individual from gaining control over your mindset. When you remove the emotional charge from the situation, you create a space where you can engage with the toxic person in a way that doesn't invite further drama. You might choose to calmly set boundaries, to assert your needs, or even to disengage, but none of this is driven by emotional reactivity. It's driven by emotional regulation. And in doing so, you shift the dynamic. You stop being a player in their game. Instead, you become the observer, the person who chooses how to move forward with clarity instead of getting caught in the whirlwind of their negativity. When we encounter toxic behavior, it's easy to think that it's a personal attack on us. We feel slighted, disrespected, or even threatened, but in reality, the toxic behavior you're seeing is rarely about you. It's almost always rooted in something deeper within the toxic individual. Toxicity often stems from unresolved emotional pain, insecurities, or unmet needs that someone hasn't processed. That's why it's so important to reframe how you view their actions. Roles at Stanford. The truth is, their behavior is an outward manifestation of their inner turmoil, and when you understand this, you gain the ability to detach from their negativity. You stop internalizing their toxic actions as something that reflects your own worth. Think about it for a second. When someone lashes out or behaves in a hurtful way, it's often because they themselves are hurting, struggling with insecurities, past trauma, or unresolved emotional wounds. They might be projecting their anger, jealousy, or frustration onto others because it's easier to project those feelings than to face their own pain. It's a defense mechanism, not a direct attack. By recognizing this, you can separate their behavior from your sense of self. You stop personalizing their negativity and instead see it for what it truly is: a cry for help, and an expression of unresolved emotional conflict, or simply a reflection of their inability to regulate their own emotions. When you view toxic people through this lens, it shifts your perspective. You no longer see their actions as an indictment of who you are. You begin to understand that their words, behaviors, and attitudes are a reflection of their own unresolved struggles. They might not even be aware of the impact they're having, and more importantly, they might never be willing to change unless they consciously work through their own pain. This understanding gives you the power to step back emotionally. You stop reacting to them with the same level of intensity because you realize that engaging with their toxicity is only going to drag you down into their cycle of emotional chaos. This mindset allows you to approach the situation from a place of emotional neutrality. You don't have to feel sorry for them, but you also don't need to take their toxicity personally. Instead, you can focus on protecting your own energy and emotional well-being. You can be aware of their behavior, but choose not to absorb it into your own sense of identity. You become the observer, not the participant in their drama. And by doing so, at Stanford, you reclaim control over your emotional landscape and prevent their unresolved issues from dictating your peace. When you're in the presence of a toxic person, it's almost inevitable that your emotions will be triggered. Your heart might race, your thoughts start to spin, and the urge to either lash out or retreat becomes almost overpowering. This is where emotional regulation becomes a game changer. Toxic people often have the ability to get under your skin in ways that can feel visceral, making you feel like you to react immediately. But the reality is, in those moments, you have a powerful choice. You can either let your emotions run wild, or you can take a step back and regain control over your response. Here's the science behind why this works. When you're exposed to stress or negativity, the amygdala, the part of your brain that's responsible for detecting threats, becomes activated. This triggers a cascade of physiological responses. Your heart rate increases, your muscles tense, and your body gets flooded with stress hormones like cortisol. This is your body's natural fight or flight response kicking in a mechanism meant to protect you from immediate danger. However, in the case of a toxic individual, this response can often be unnecessary since the threat is emotional, not physical. But the body doesn't always distinguish between the two, and that's why your emotions feel so heightened in these situations. Here's where emotional regulation comes into play. By learning to pause, breathe, and reset, you can engage the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for higher level thinking, decision making, and impulse control. This shift in brain activity helps you distance yourself from the raw, knee-jerk emotional reactions triggered by the amygdala. In that crucial moment, you can choose not to escalate the situation. You might take a deep breath, count to 3, or even physically step back. All of these small actions are ways to signal to your brain that you are in control, not the toxic person or the environment. This conscious pause gives you the space to assess the situation more clearly. Instead of reacting impulsively in Stanford, you can respond with a level of calm that prevents you from being pulled into their drama. And at Stanford, emotional regulation isn't about suppressing your emotions or pretending like you're fine when you're not. It's about acknowledging your emotions without allowing them to dictate your actions. This is a skill that, when practiced over time, becomes second nature. You start to build resilience, and you learn how to remain grounded even in the most challenging interactions. The more you practice emotional regulation at Stanford, the more you free yourself from the toxic person's influence on your emotional state. And that's where your true power lies. And for one of the most important, often overlooked tools in dealing with toxic people is setting healthy boundaries. Now, when most people hear the word boundary, they often think of walls or walls of silence, but that's not what we're talking about here. Boundaries are not about creating walls that block you off from others. They are about establishing clear lines that communicate how you want to be treated, how you expect to be treated, and what you will not tolerate. It's about taking responsibility for your own emotional space and making sure it's protected. Setting boundaries with toxic people can be incredibly difficult. There's often a fear of conflict or rejection, a fear that if you set limits, the relationship will crumble. But here's the reality: toxic people are already testing your limits. They might push your buttons, manipulate your emotions, or ignore your needs. By failing to set clear boundaries at Stanford, you're essentially allowing them to continue overstepping, draining your energy, and creating more emotional chaos in your life. Without boundaries, there is no foundation for healthy interaction. The toxic person gets what they want, and you get left feeling exhausted, frustrated, and depleted. When you do set boundaries, the key is consistency. Toxic people thrive on inconsistency because it gives them room to push, manipulate, and make you question your own decisions. But when you set a boundary clearly and assertively, and you stick to it no matter what, you send a clear message, you respect yourself, and you expect others to do the same. It's not about being harsh or punitive. It's about being clear and firm in your expectations. If someone crosses a line, you don't back down. You don't apologize for having standards. This may feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you're used to accommodating or people pleasing, but it's essential for your emotional well-being. Boundaries also allow you to engage with toxic people on your terms. They don't have to dictate how you respond or how much energy you invest in the relationship. For example, if someone tends to belittle you in conversations, you can set the boundary that you won't engage in discussions where you're disrespected. Or if someone is constantly draining your energy with negativity, you can set the boundary that you'll limit your time with them or disengage when the conversation turns toxic. In setting boundaries, you're creating space for yourself, space where you can protect your peace and maintain your emotional health. Ultimately, boundaries empower you. They give you control over your interactions, and they allow you to decide what you will and won't tolerate. It's not about pushing people away. It's about teaching others how to treat you with respect and dignity. And by doing so, you reclaim your energy and preserve your well-being. When it comes to dealing with toxic people, one of the most important realizations you can have is that you cannot and should not try to fix them. This is a trap that many well-intentioned people fall into. We often feel compelled to help others, especially when we see their struggles, their pain, or their negative behaviors. It's a natural human instinct to want to save someone from their own toxicity. But here's the harsh truth. You can't fix someone else's unresolved emotional wounds. And the more you try, the more entangled you become in their dysfunction. Toxic people are often operating from a place of deep internal turmoil, whether it's insecurity, past trauma, or an inability to regulate their own emotions. They may not even realize how their behavior is affecting others, and they may not be open to change, especially if they haven't done the internal work to confront their issues. Trying to fix them is not only exhausting, but it also prevents them from taking responsibility for their own healing. More importantly, it drains your energy and prevents you from focusing on what you can control: your own responses, your own emotional health, and your own boundaries. What makes this even more complicated is that at some level, toxic individuals can become highly manipulative. They know how to push your buttons, how to guilt trip you, or how to make you feel like you're the one who needs to change. In these situations, your desire to help can become a form of emotional manipulation, where you feel like you have to take on their problems as your own. This is not healthy, and it's not your responsibility. When you try to fix someone, you inadvertently give them permission to stay stuck in their toxic behaviors because they're not being held accountable for their actions. Instead of trying to fix them, the smarter approach is to focus on managing your own responses and maintaining your emotional boundaries. You can offer compassion, understanding, and even support, but only within the boundaries of what's healthy for you. The key is to realize that change can only happen if they are willing to do the work themselves. If they're not open to growth or self-awareness, then all of your efforts to help will only serve to feed their toxicity and keep them stuck in their patterns. By refusing to take on the responsibility for fixing someone else, you regain control over your own life. You stop investing energy in someone who isn't ready to change, and you start investing in yourself, in your peace, your emotional regulation, and your personal growth. Trying to fix someone else ultimately robs you of the ability to protect your own well-being, and that's the one thing you must prioritize in order to stay strong and resilient in the face of toxic behavior. One of the most transformative shifts you can make in dealing with toxic people is to embrace the concept of non-attachment. And when I say non-attachment, I'm not referring to apathy or indifference. It's not about disengaging from life or relationships altogether. Instead, non-attachment is about letting go of the need for validation, approval, or emotional reaction from the toxic individual. It's about protecting your inner peace and emotional state, regardless of how they behave or what they say. This is a powerful mindset because it frees you from the emotional grip that toxic people often have over you. When we attach ourselves to the opinions and behaviors of others, especially toxic individuals, we place our sense of self-worth in their hands. We become dependent on their approval or their acceptance for our own emotional well-being. The problem with this is that toxic people often thrive on unpredictability and emotional volatility. Their behavior is erratic, and their treatment of others can range from passive, aggressive comments to outright hostility. By becoming emotionally attached to their behavior, you're allowing their negativity to dictate how you feel, which keeps you trapped in a cycle of emotional instability. Non-attachment, however, allows you to stay grounded and centered no matter what the toxic person does. This doesn't mean you stop caring about them as a human being. It simply means you stop giving them the power to disrupt your inner peace. When you detach emotionally from their reactions, you stop seeing them as a source of validation. You stop looking for signs of approval or seeking to appease them, and you stop internalizing their toxic behavior as a reflection of your own value. The more you practice non-attachment, the more you free yourself from the emotional influence of toxic people. You can still acknowledge their negativity and perhaps even empathize with their struggles, but you no longer allow their words, actions, or attitudes to affect your own sense of self-worth. This shift doesn't just protect your emotional space, it actually strengthens it. It builds resilience because you're no longer relying on others to define how you feel or how you should respond. You create a solid inner foundation that cannot be easily shaken by external negativity. Non-attachment also helps you make clearer decisions in your interactions with toxic individuals. Instead of reacting impulsively to their behavior, you can respond from a place of clarity and strength. You can choose how you want to engage with them, and more importantly, how much emotional energy you're willing to invest in that interaction. By practicing non-attachment, you not only protect your peace, but you also become more resilient and less vulnerable to their emotional manipulation. This is a crucial skill for maintaining your own well-being in a world where toxicity can often be present. When dealing with toxic people, one of the most powerful approaches you can adopt is empathy without engagement. Now, this might sound counterintuitive at first. How can you empathize with someone and not get pulled into their drama? But empathy in this context is about understanding where the toxic person is coming from, recognizing that their behavior often stems from unresolved pain or insecurities, without allowing that understanding to drag you into their emotional chaos. This is a critical skill because toxic individuals can be incredibly skilled at manipulating emotions. They can provoke you, upset you, and get under your skin. But when you engage emotionally, you lose your power. Empathy, without being emotionally engaged, is your tool for maintaining control. Toxic individuals are often acting out of their own emotional pain or unmet needs. Their behavior could be a result of past trauma, a lack of emotional regulation, or simply the patterns they've learned to survive. They may not even be aware of the harm they are causing. This awareness that their negativity has nothing to do with you allows you to step back emotionally. Instead of taking their actions personally, you can step into the role of observer. You don't have to agree with or condone their behavior, but you can recognize that their actions are the result of their internal struggles, not a direct attack on you. This gives you the emotional distance you need to stay grounded and not get swept up in their toxicity. When you practice this type of empathy, you allow yourself to feel compassion for the person's struggles without absorbing their emotional turmoil. You acknowledge their pain, but you don't let it define your emotional state. You can understand that they are likely acting from a place of hurt or frustration, but you don't need to be drawn into it. This mental shift is incredibly empowering because it puts you in a position of emotional control. It allows you to approach the situation with clarity instead of reacting emotionally to their negative behavior. Empathy without engagement also means you don't let the toxic person dictate the terms of the relationship. You can be compassionate, but you don't have to engage with their drama. You don't have to tolerate disrespect, and you don't have to enable their destructive patterns. By practicing this approach, you create a clear boundary emotionally and behaviorally that protects your well-being while still allowing for a sense of understanding and compassion. This allows you to engage with the toxic person in a way that maintains your peace without getting swept up in their emotional chaos. One of the most effective strategies when dealing with toxic people is to adopt a mindset of observation rather than reaction. Most of the time, toxic individuals will try to provoke a response, whether it's through manipulation, aggression, or emotional volatility. They want to pull you into their emotional world, where things are chaotic and unpredictable. But when you shift from reacting to observing, you take away the power they have over your emotions. This subtle yet powerful change allows you to remain centered, calm, and in control, regardless of the storm that might be swirling around you. The first step in adopting this mindset is recognizing that you have a choice in how you engage with any situation. When toxic people behave in harmful ways, your initial instinct may be to fight back or to defend yourself. These reactions are instinctual, hardwired into us by the brain's survival mechanisms. The amygdala, which is responsible for detecting threats, can hijack our rational thinking and send us into a state of emotional reactivity. But here's the catch: this immediate reaction, driven by emotional impulses, often escalates the situation. It reinforces the toxic cycle and leads to more conflict. Instead of getting emotionally entangled, you can take a step back and simply observe the situation. When you observe rather than react, you create a space between what's happening externally and your internal state. You acknowledge the toxic behavior, but you don't allow it to define your emotional experience. This gives you the opportunity to process what's happening without feeling the need to immediately defend yourself or retaliate. You start to engage more rationally using your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for thinking, reasoning, and decision-making, to guide your response. By observing the situation, You give yourself the time to think through your options rather than impulsively reacting to the emotional turbulence around you. This observation doesn't mean detachment in a cold or indifferent way. Instead, it's a conscious choice to remain neutral, to stay grounded in your own emotional state. You can still acknowledge their pain or their struggles, but you don't allow their negative energy to overpower your peace. In a sense, you become the neutral observer in the room, watching the toxic behavior without allowing it to drag you into the drama. This mental shift puts you in control rather than letting the toxic person dictate the emotional temperature of the interaction. By staying in the role of the observer, you remain powerful and unshaken, able to engage thoughtfully and protect your own emotional well.